I'd like to begin by reminding you all that we're trying to put our blessings up on the walls. So if you weren't here last week and you didn't hear how we talked about abundance and how blessed we are, we want to fill as many walls as possible with lots of sticky notes, of which we have baskets full of sticky notes here, with your blessings. And I love the fact that I have seen some scattered around, not just all here in front, but it was fun to come in and realize, oh, there's one over there, and there's another one hiding over there. We want to fill the walls with blessings. So don't go home today until you've put at least one blessing up on the walls. You all pray with me. Oh Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. What I want you to think about this morning is who, what, or where is at the center of your being. That's the thought for the day. Ponder that as we go forward. We're going to begin with a little history. What we heard from Jeremiah. And why does that have any relevance for us? Because once upon a time, Israel was a very great nation. For a few hundred years, beginning with King David and King Solomon, Israel flourished. They were a strong people and they followed in the way of Yahweh. Yahweh was their God and they belonged to Yahweh. They lived by the commandments that Yahweh had given them. But over time, many generations, they mingled with their neighbors and took on ways of other religions and other gods. And they turned away from Yahweh. The nation of Israel weakened and became easy prey for Assyria and Babylon. In the 6th century BCE, God calls Jeremiah to speak to the people in the name of God. We read the story of the call of Jeremiah last week. And this week we begin with the prophetic words of Jeremiah. We're going to hear a lot from Jeremiah between now and the beginning of Advent. This week's reading begins with God declaring how God recalls when Israel loved God. And like newlyweds love, that God loved Israel in a very special way. And God also recalls how God protected Israel. But then God declares they took up with other gods. They forgot that God had brought them to a beautiful and bountiful land flowing with milk and honey. But they polluted it and trashed it and defiled it. And the rulers defied God and they turned to Baal. Even the priests forgot Yahweh and encouraged the people in silly dreams and schemes. Furthermore, God declares how absurd it is that any nation should trade in the glory and promise of Yahweh for false and misleading and empty gods. God is purely astonished, just astonished that the people of Israel have walked out on him and have traded all of God's goodness for a pile of nothingness. God is like a beautiful, clear, flowing, nurturing stream, beautiful flowing water. But now all the people have are cracked pots that hold nothing. The leaders of Israel have forgotten to ask, where is Yahweh? They have forgotten to look for the real deal. And so they pay the price. And in 586 BCE, Israel will fall to Babylon, and the temple is destroyed, and all of Israel will be sent into exile, and Jeremiah with them. Sadly, Israel was not the first or only great nation that ever collapsed. Rome collapsed. The British Empire collapsed. Dynasties have come and gone in China, and once much of the Mediterranean world all spoke Greek. We humans seem to have a hard time keeping on top of things, so to speak. The more we prosper and succeed, the more we seem to turn away from the source of all that is good. Success and power go to our heads, and we forget who we really are and who is really in charge. Turning to false gods, to worthless idols, is a problem for nations, for communities, for religious organizations, for families, and even for individuals. We all need to be reminded of our place in the scheme of things and who is really in charge. The story that Jesus tells at the dinner reminds us not to think too highly of ourselves. He reminds us to give deference to others, and especially to the least of these. There is a price to be paid when we exalt ourselves. He also tells us that when we invite the misfits and the outsiders, we will be blessed. Sometimes we postmodern folks may think that the Bible has nothing to say to us. A lot of hogwash. Old-fashioned, for long ago. But its basic messages have rung true to the experiences of humanity for many thousands of years. The basics of the Adam and Eve story of Genesis is much older than our Bible. The tale comes from the ancient Near East long before the folks we are more familiar with wrote anything down. But all those eons ago, wise people understood something about our human nature, our desire for power and knowledge. In essence, our desire to be like God and to ignore that which is greater than all of us. To ignore that which should be at the center of our being. In 2015, I had the privilege of traveling to India with a group of alumni from Yale University. It was an eye-opening and life-changing experience. I think there were about 70 of us, 2 busfuls. There were medical doctors, nurses, a midwife, professors of all sorts, an economist, an artist, businessmen and women, a few theater people, a couple of musicians, an architect, and many more, including this lowly pastor. And our group included about a dozen children. I loved getting to know these folks with long lists of professional accomplishments and most with many academic degrees. But the thing that set this group apart was a deep passion for humanity and for giving back and for raising others up. No one was there to toot their own horn. Everyone came to serve, to work, to care, to share, and to learn. Several months prior to our arrival, the organizers of this Yale Alumni Service Corps project had met with the leaders and elders of a little village named Kakalau in Rajasthan. The elders had shared the needs of this village and a plan put in place for how we might meet some of those needs. So each of us was given an assignment, which may or may not have anything to do with any skills or background that we had. Some built desks and benches for the school. Some brought medical testing for diabetes and hypertension and malnutrition. The midwife taught the local women the latest in birthing practices. A technology whiz brought computers and the internet to the village. And the artist, a man about 75 years old, he painted an extraordinary mural on the blank concrete walls of the Anganwadi. An Anganwadi is a kind of daycare for toddlers, which is nothing but cinder block walls and a dirt floor. And that's all there is. But now it had a gorgeous mural on the inside. And some of us were assigned to take over the primary school, where we taught some English and math and science and music and art to about 300 children. The goal was to bring some English language and enrichment to their educational experience in this very rural area. We also shared several meals with the whole village, an Indian potluck. We broke bread with them, or rather naan. On our first day, each of us was invited to a home where we sat on the floor. We were welcomed, offered some local refreshments, met the families, heard about their lives. And the truth is, from the whole experience, I got much more than I gave. And while traveling around other parts of India, I came to understand what an extraordinary culture and people they were, and how amazingly old. Like China, their history goes back thousands of years. And the land is dotted with palaces and forts that predate Jesus by a long time. And while there are many problems in India, there is at its heart a deep understanding of connectedness and of our responsibilities to each other. Maybe you have to learn that when there's 1.4 billion of you. Did you know that every person in India receives an allotment of lentils and rice and some other basic provisions every month? The idea is that no one should be starving. And in fact, while some of our group tested children for malnutrition, we didn't find even one child suffering from a lack of food. And this was not a wealthy village, mostly subsistence farmers in a very rural area. And there are thousands of Anganwadis all over India. They are placed about 5 kilometers apart, which means every woman can walk to one, receive care for herself and her babies. Everyone is provided for. Sometimes the places on this earth that we may think of as less than are actually in some ways more than. As in any human society, power has often corrupted people. But among the very common folk, there is a centeredness and a peace. There is an understanding that we are all in this together. That was clearly evident in the village. Great efforts were made to make sure village life was fair and equitable. And we were cautioned about not showing favoritism or giving gifts. And I was impressed at that Anganwadi, that Center for Mothers and Babies and Toddlers, that it was often difficult to know who was the child's mother because the women cared for each other and their children in such a common way. And at the primary school, when the children were asked to line up for receiving a snack, there was never any pushing or shoving or jockeying for position. And if pencils were in short supply, there was never any fighting. All the children were provided with a basic blue simple uniform, blue pants, and a blue shirt or a blue dress. They took care of each other. And as we worked together and ate and even celebrated together, our common humanity was very evident. And the heat and humidity and dust had a way of making us all equal. Smiles and laughter also helped. Most of the folks in this part of India are Hindu. And while they seem to have many gods and build enormous temples and statues to them, as they explain, each of those gods is simply an expression of the one, capital O-N-E. At its deepest, we are all connected to the same creator, the same Father, Mother, God, the same Yahweh, the same Great Spirit, the same all in all, the same source, the same love. But those villagers seem much more in touch with that essence of their being than many of us fancier and more sophisticated Westerners. Sometimes I have wondered whether or not we did them a favor when we brought computers and the internet to Kakalau. I am not sure that we have as much to truly offer them as they have to offer us. Maybe their sense of interconnectedness is helped by the fact that even the cows and the peacocks are sacred. They see what is sacred in everything. I think the villagers probably could understand what Paul wrote better than we do when he wrote, "Don't be obsessed with getting more material things. Be relaxed with what you have." Christianity is ultimately about a simple life, focused on God, not on material things, not on wealth, not on power or prestige or position. It is about who we are in God and how we live out that understanding in the world. It is about how we offer hospitality and care to others, about how we give of ourselves, and about how we ground our life in God. A God who does not change and who was and is the Alpha and Omega of all creation, no matter how named. And like Israel, if we forget this and we worship wealth and power and stuff, we will perish just like Israel. Our neighbors on the other side of this planet can teach us things about how we ought to live and have our being in the one. And as they say, namaste, which means I honor the place in you that is the same in me. I honor the place in you where the whole universe resides. I honor the place in you of love, of light, of peace, and of truth. I honor the place in you that is the same in me. There is but one. Namaste. Amen. Will you sing with me number 727?